Hello, everyone. My name is AJ Bushy. I'm in the communications department here at Boyce Thompson Institute. And I would like to thank you all for coming and welcome you to our first Art at BTI event that we've done in person since 2019. So thank you all for coming. We made it this far. And thank you for being here. And thank you to everyone out there on Zoom who's also joining us. I think there are a few people there. And I also want to thank the speakers. First, June Zebo, and our scientist, Magda Julkowska. Unfortunately, Magda will be joining us via Zoom this evening. She was exposed to COVID yesterday. She's still testing negative, but she's keeping us all safe by doing it remotely. So we thank her for that. I would also like to thank Cayuga Landscape for sponsoring this event again. Done it many times. We appreciate you. And I would just like to let you know, in between June and Magda's talks, there will be a raffle for the beautiful centerpiece bouquet that was outside. If you saw it out on the table out there, if you donate, then you'll be entered to win that in the raffle. And there's still time if you would like to. We'll always take donations. And after Magda's talk, there will be a greenhouse tour for the 15 lucky folks who signed up. I think there is still some room in that. So if you want to tour the greenhouse, you can do that with Brian, who's back there. And also after the talks, Anna and Jen from the Alliance for Science will be serving some delicious fresh fruit out there in the atrium. So that's a special treat we have this time around. So thank you to Anna and Jen for organizing that. And before we get going, I'd just like to say a few quick words about this Art at BTI event. While Art at BTI often seem like opposites, they complement each other very well by offering different ways of seeking truths in the world we live in. BTI researchers conduct scientific experiments to discover insights into the natural world based on measurements and numbers, and artists examine the world through their own creative lens and create works of art to share their insights with us and to help us make our own insights about life and the human condition. By bringing both art and science together, we hope to show that there's more than one way to view the world around us. And to kick things off, I'd like to introduce June Zebo, who is here. June is a sculptor and weaver from Trumansburg, New York. She received a bachelor's degree in major art from the State University of New York at Geneseo and a master's degree in art education from Elmira College. And the source of June's work is the natural world, and the subject matter a metaphor, and its final form a partial abstraction of the original object. Layering wood and weaving with wire physically create thousands of connections necessary for the existence of the final product. And art is her way of examining our relationship to nature, the earth, and each other. June shows her work in local and regional galleries in New York State. She's been accepted in several museum shows, including the Everson, Cooperstown, Munson Williams Proctor, Rochester Memorial Art Gallery, Arnault Art Museum, Schweinfurth, did I pronounce that right? Schweinfurth, Museum of Earth, and many others. So we are very lucky to have her here tonight and to be showing some of her beautiful sculptures out in the atrium. And June will be conducting some readings from her forthcoming book, which is expected to publish this autumn, in a talk entitled The Transformative Power of Connections in Nature and in Our Lives. June Zebo.
Great. Thank you. I just want to start out by saying thank you all for coming, and thank you, Boyce Thompson, for inviting me. I am humbled and grateful for your presence, but I am also very nervous about presenting my philosophical science to real scientists. I hope you will bear with me as I challenge you with what may be a different way of thinking. I call my artwork landscape sculpture. My landscapes could cover more than 100 miles or just a few inches. I find I must visit the places I depict, and sometimes I'm joined by family and friends. I find I must visit the places I depict. And when I bring along my family, they don't seem to mind too much. I always write about my work. It helps me remember what I have learned and to understand why I have spent so much time making this object. In hopes of being clear and brief, I will be reading some excerpts from a book I've been working on. The book started out as a kind of catalog, a way to share something about my work with my children and my grandchildren so they would know what they're left with when I'm gone. But like most things with me, the catalog evolved into something more. And as AJ mentioned, I hope to have a book out this fall. I will be sharing with you some examples of patterns we find in the landscape and how they tell me much more than I might have imagined. We humans seem to have been born with a desire to seek and find pattern. I'm going to begin with the introduction to my book. I have been having conversations with the landscape for as long as I can remember. I have watched and listened to the world from my fort in a hayfield, on the limb of a tree, at a lakeshore, and on a rock in a stream. Though no words are spoken, I see, hear, smell, taste, and touch the wisdom of the earth. Its views are broad and open on the lake shores and the hills. They are intimate and revealing in the gorges and the glens. Secrets are tossed or bubbled to the surface with stone, sand, or salt, and whispered by wind and water. On a day I am looking for grace, I go outside, hike to a hilltop, wander a ridge, or stumble through a ravine. I gently place my hand on a clump of inviting moss, admire a fungus that has emerged from the trunk of a tree, and breathe in the forest air. Always fascinated by what I find, and sometimes puzzled, I wonder, what is the world telling me about my life? How do lichens survive? How do trees talk to each other? How can a stream bottom be a former ocean floor? How does the landscape embrace and adjust to every situation? When I don't find the answer, I burrow into my mountain of books, researched and written by authors who study many subjects: geology, sociology, philosophy, biology. They help me translate the wordless wisdom offered by the earth. When I can contemplate no more, the power of a place and the questions in my mind, they spill out into my hands. I go to my studio and produce a working drawing inspired by my expeditions into the landscape and by topographical maps. Layers of lumber give my thoughts depth and dimension. I build a wood sculpture by cutting and stacking hundreds of pieces of wood. As the miniature hills are joined together with glue and clamps, I also carve them. For me, assembling and removing wood from a sculpture is akin to the process followed by water as it shapes our land. I create my metal sculptures by wrapping a core of wire into coils and joining them with a basket stitch. I warp my loom with copper wire and weave panels that are folded, pleated, and bent into three-dimensional forms. Weaving creates thousands of connections and intersections, bonds that are sometimes unseen, but essential for life. To create my metal, physically and spiritually, I am wound about and woven into the living processes of the earth. With this work, I am making objects to honor our natural world and weaving together the person I am with who I will become. Each work of art has been an opportunity to reflect on my life and the world around me, to share what I have learned, and to bind together my lessons from the forest and the fields with a powerful sense of place. I write them down. I am unable to escape those connections any more than I can escape breathing the air. This next slide is a place that most of you are probably familiar with, and one where pattern laid out in layers reveals its history. The view from the overlook at Taganic Falls includes the bowl-like structure that surrounds it. When viewed on a map, the amphitheater around the falls suggests the shape of cupped hands. It was impossible for me to visit and not wonder how Taganic came to be. About 12,000 years ago, the Laurentide ice sheet began its retreat toward Lake Ontario, and the gorge began to take its present-day form. Water from the surrounding hills and the melting glacier carved through the exposed shale and siltstone bedrock along the edge of the lake valley. The ever-changing Taganic Gorge grew wider and longer. In the Finger Lakes region, gorges erode by taking advantage of a natural fracture framework. These are tight cracks crossing at various angles, penetrating the layers of rock below the surface. For thousands of years, the mist from Taganic Falls has moved through these cracks. As the water freezes and then thaws, the rock expands and contracts, enhancing erosion around the falls to carve the bowl. As with any gorge, there is more than one way to view Taganic. The overlook above the falls is serene and peaceful, but walking the trail below gives me a better sense of its size and the power of nature. The trail is flat, the opening wide, and it zigzags, never allowing me to see very far ahead. Shale fragments roll down the gorge walls and across the trail, or collect in mounds beside it. As I cross a bridge over the creek, the falls are fully revealed. Entering the amphitheater, I experience feelings of reverence, anxiety, and wonder. Here the trail ends, and the open bowl becomes a wall with no way to move forward. To be released, I must return to the original path. Taganic is fraught with contradiction, constant yet constantly changing. It is a place where I find peace and serenity mingled with a hint of alarm, a paradox shared by the hands I saw in the bowl. Are they open and welcoming, or empty and hollow? Have they lost what they held, or are they ready to receive? We use cupped hands to help us see, to call, to hear, or to close our eyes, mouth, and ears. Up, down, in, out, north, south. Is my glass half full or half empty? Taganic makes me wonder, is it possible to conjure up opposition and contradiction in anything and everywhere? This next piece is called Weaving Water, woven on a loom from nearly 50 pounds of 22 gauge tin-coated copper wire. This piece was inspired by the patterns that appear in water and my curiosity about how they are formed. This led me to investigate stream flow and to remember that water is not a single united body, but a combination of currents in layers, levels, or strands. These strands flow in patterns that are laminar or turbulent. Layers are laminar when everything is running smoothly and there are no disturbances in the water. When the flow is interrupted, layers become unstable. They break up and turbulence occurs, perhaps created by an obstacle, an increase in flow or density, or a change in direction. When forced to travel around an obstacle, a wake appears below the object, and an eddy or a vortex may also appear. The most hurried water is at the top and in the center of a watercourse, but eventually it falls and spirals to the side. The movement of water over the surface of the earth is a metaphor for how our lives progress through moments of calm and turbulence. We are at times powerful, weak, wandering, purposeful, confronting, conforming, callous, and comforting. When water meets an obstacle, it must overcome, undermine, or go around it, change direction, take a new path. When a stream eventually ends, the water moves on, becoming a river, an ocean, a cloud. Water is like my life, constantly shifting and evolving, never again to be what it is at this moment, at this time or place. Like water, sometimes I must just go with the flow. This next piece is called Branching the Hector Backbone. And this is a pond, Potomac Pond, actually, in the Finger Lakes National Forest. A series of hills covered with forest, pastures, vineyards, and wandering water. The Hector Backbone is the highest ridge between Seneca and Cayuga Lakes. Perennial streams, which contain moisture in the driest seasons, have created beautiful gorges and ravines. Ephemeral streams, which flow intermittently, leave evidence of their existence with depressions in the soil, exposed rock, and a lack of vegetation. The direction and connection between these many wandering trails of water is difficult to comprehend. If I follow a stream on the backbone, it may not foretell its final destination. When viewed on a map, I see that the backbone is embraced by a network of branches created by many small streams, a watershed for two lakes. The destiny of precipitation that falls upon this series of hills can be a matter of chance. Is the wind blowing? Is there a pond, a puddle, or a stone to send a drop of water in one of many directions? Seeking the path of least resistance and directed by the earth beneath, these are streams of consequence. Precipitation, elevation, topography, and the geology of the backbone are the creators of these branches. Branches are sections, parts, and members. Together, they combine, consolidate, and solidify. This pattern occurs naturally in the merging of streams and the formation of flora and the development of our own bodies. This configuration is the means through which our tissues are nourished and we achieve the use of our arms, legs, fingers, and toes. The backbone's branches are created by combining opportunity and chance. I have tried to follow this advice. Similar to a stream of consequence, I was directed to a degree in education by a scholarship, though I wasn't sure I wanted to teach. Taking a chance, like water directed by wind, coincidental conversations have led to jobs I wasn't sure I could do. An ephemeral stream leaves an impression and a connection for the next time it's needed. I never burn my bridges. I believe that everyone deserves a second chance. Like a perennial streams, though sometimes reduced to a trickle, I cannot stop making things with my hands. This next sculpture, which is not showing yet, is hanging out in the lobby, and it's called A Parallel Journey. It includes Flint Creek, West River, and Canandaigua Lake. And there's a picture of, as I mentioned earlier, I have to visit all of the places that I depict in my sculpture. And I try to take pictures of the place. So, well, partly so I remember where I am, but also so it's in a group of pictures and I know what that group of pictures is from. So this sculpture has its source in a collection of hills south and east of Canandaigua Lake. They are known as High Tor, which means pile of rocks on a rise. The precipitation that gathers in the swamps and hilltops of High Tor will be divided, united, changed, or make changes when it touches the earth. After moving from the hills, water collects in two major streams, Flint Creek flowing north and West River moving south. Each stream meanders through a valley separated by the narrow hills of High Tor, making them parallel as they flow in opposite directions. West River contributes its contents to Canandaigua Lake, which flows north into an outlet. The once divided water from High Tor reunites when Flint Creek and the outlet merge in the town of Phelps. The movement of the precipitation that collects in the hills of High Tor becomes a symbol for our divergent journeys, sometimes parallel and at other times perpendicular. Like water, when we touch the earth, we are changed by the world around us, arriving with the same basic chemistry, yet divided by ideas and dissimilar situations. We move in different directions. Will I take the path of least resistance and absorb the opinions that surround me? Will I alter the banks of my stream and wear down what is established? The necessities of life are equal: food, water, shelter, and this could unite us. However, what is equal is seen through individual eyes. If I drift in a swamp of self-interest, it will create division. It is better to keep searching until the channels that connect with others are found. In the end, there is no division. Slipping into the same water, we are unavoidably combined. This next sculpture, and this is not the sculpture, but it's part of a series I have been working on. I have completed 5 pieces with this theme and 2 on this particular idea. They are about letting go. Though each piece has given me some tools to help with that process, I have also learned that I need to do more work. Actually, I think I could work on this for the rest of my life. The title of this next piece is called Let Go to Grow. Our top-heavy, off-kiltered Earth reaches a point in its orbit when the tilted northern hemisphere faces the sun and winter begins to fade. As days lengthen and warm, and the beauty of barren branches is increased by swelling buds, fulfilling a promise made the previous summer. Roused by sap in the stirring tree, scales fall from the sprouting limbs as flowers and leaves emerge. Although in this spring, there were no fruit on this tree. It snowed right after it blossomed. Leaves wearing various shades of green make food for the tree from sunlight, air, and water, adding length and girth to the plants they support. A tree has the power to prune its leaves in any season, the result of stress by pest, drought, or too much clutter. When the world once again leans into its winter position, trees begin to seal themselves from the elements and follow nature's law of return. Fruits containing future generations are dispersed, and chlorophyll fades from senescent leaves, revealing their glorious hidden colors. Concluding their primary purpose, all are released through abscission, achieved by closing off veins transporting nourishment and the weakening of specific connecting cells. Blanketing the ground, the fallen foliage protects roots from the cold while holding in moisture. If the leaves remained on the tree, the added weight from gathering ice and snow would break the branches. Instead, on the earth, insects and fungi recycle the leaves into humus, The nutrients that remain mix with rain and travel back to the trees through their roots. Deciduous plants have learned to live in a land of changing seasons, resting, waking, growing, then letting go, to repeat the cycle again. Populating the landscape for nearly 500 million years, the plant kingdom has much to teach us. People, like trees, depend upon sunlight, air, water, release, and renewal. In our lifetime, we will grow and feed relationships and ideas that are valuable and sustainable. Others, like the leaves, are senescent, and we will need to let them fall. For those I am ready to surrender, I can practice abscission, shrink attachments, let them dissolve, shed the people, thoughts, and emotions that have wounded me. The remains of what I have surrendered, combined with understanding, will rise to feed my capacity for forgiveness and help me to grow indispensable wisdom. I can lean into what I fear with the budding knowledge I have gained by following nature's law of return. This piece is not finished yet, but when it is, it will be the third piece I have done about the Fibonacci series. And it will be Ode to Fibonacci, the third Ode to Fibonacci. Historians think Leonardo Bonacci, who came to be known as Fibonacci, was born in Pisa in the year 1170. He spent much of his youth in the Middle East, where he learned the Hindu-Arabic numeral system. In 1202, Fibonacci published Liber Abaci, Book of the Abacus. In his book, he explained the Hindu-Arabic system and his famous sequence. The Fibonacci series is a progression of numbers found in many natural forms: pine cones, marigolds, sunflowers, shells, and leaves on a stem. The next number in the Fibonacci series is always the sum of the two numbers before it. So 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 3, 5, 5 plus 3, 8. I think I said that right. The sequence is recognized in many growing things. Even waves and galaxies expand in an orderly mathematical way. Psychologists believe that the human brain thrives on predictability and regularity. We are designed to seek pattern. It gives us a sense of stability and control. This number series appears often in the natural world and brings to mind the question, was math discovered or invented? Did humans apply math to nature or simply find what was already there? In the world of numbers, or one of events, in any progression, the past added to the present equals the future. We must all find our own way in the world. When I started to explore and listen to the vast and varied web of life that encircles us, I began to find my own. The path I stumbled upon is worn with curiosity, questions, and a desire to never assume or trample. I prefer to observe, to live with care and wonder, to be of the earth, and to look toward the stars. How the land accommodates the oddities left by retreating glaciers speaks to how I move on from difficult events. What happens when land is moved from one place to another explains how to build from what seems lost. Life-giving leaves fall from a tree and contribute to the tree's future. This told me to let go of what is no longer useful and to use the past to find strength in the future. A stream without a point reminds me that sometimes there are no answers. Scars, division, reflection, regrets, worry, and isolation, peace, joy, beauty, wonder, and wisdom. How does the earth link all things together and then deal with the loss of a connecting part. With these words, it is not my purpose to preach, convince, or give advice on how others should live their lives. Instead, my hope is to humbly share how I am finding mine. It is not easy to discover your voice in a world like ours. It can vanish in the cacophony of declarations and assertions made by others. Even when surrounded by people, we can be lost, just as we might be in the woods, the desert, or the mountains. But in the landscape, I have available all the wisdom of nature to help me find my way home. That's it.
Thank you so much, June.
Sure.
Now we can do some questions from the audience. You can do some here and then from Zoom if there are any back there from Zoom. Does anyone have any questions?
I can ask one, AJ.
David?
I just caught my statement seemed offhand, almost the past plus the present equals the future. So does it mean believe in destiny, or what does it mean?
Oh, so I have to repeat the question?
Yeah,
Okay. I was asked, does the past plus the present equals the future mean I believe in destiny? Actually, that word didn't occur to me. I just think it sort of means how when your mother says, what's the expression? You made your bed, now lay in it. You know, like you gotta take what you did and put it together with where you are to make what happens tomorrow. So, but I like your question. Very interesting thought.
Do you have any from Zoom, Jason?
I'm sure I didn't explain everything. I can't believe there are no questions.
We have like close connection to nature. Was there anything like early on in your life that kind of was like a formative event? Or you'd be like, I want whatever I do in life, I want to be close to nature anyway.
So I was asked if there was an event in my early life that made me feel this closeness to nature. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I wouldn't say it was any one event, but I grew up in the country and I always went outside. I luckily had a friend in the neighborhood who loved to be outside as well. Plus we would take walks all the time to just get away from our siblings or our parents. And just being outdoors was always felt like a really good place for me to be. And I guess when I used to paint landscape paintings when I first started making art. But then we built a house and I made furniture and I loved working with wood, and then I had started weaving and I transitioned into sculpture. So I kind of took my love for landscape painting into landscape sculpture. So I wouldn't say it's any one event, but just a lifetime of being outdoors, having parents who took me to national parks, and just growing up with that being very much a part of my life. I think that's the best I can answer.
That gives you more and more
Not everything, especially when my husband says, leaves of 3, let it be. So I was asked if there is any particular art form that I think makes me feel more closer to the natural world. a part of the natural world? I would say none in particular. I'm really happy to have more than one media to work in, because what works in one, I don't think will work in another. And I guess, you know, I get obsessed with all reading information and learning and understanding what's going on sometimes. And I look up way more than I ever need to know. But that's also a part of it. Like when you learn so much about something, it just helps you to feel like you're closer to it, I guess would be the best way to answer.
I'm going to go back to the first question. And I love the response that you gave. You made your bed, now you have to sleep in it. And I've known your work for a long time. What I sense is that the bed that we've made, our history is not exactly clear to us, regardless of how much clearer it is now than it was a while back. And sleeping in it, we will discover that it's not what we thought we were getting into, and it will take us places where we do not know we're going to go. So you're not deterministic at all from my point of view, but how have you had to reclaim your past and reclaim your understanding of science to do your art?
So the question is, how have I had to reclaim my past
And your understanding of science.
and my understanding of science to do my art? I guess I would say it's not always in the past. I can think of several pieces that there was a problem going on in my life, and I looked for a place in the landscape where I could take what happened there and apply it to this issue that I was trying to deal with. So it's not always a past, it's very much a part of the future. I mean, I can think of, no, I'm not going to tell you that story. But it happens a lot, especially this letting go thing. I'm so much a worrier and a person that lets regret weigh me down. I mean, you won't believe how worried I was about being here tonight. And I kept going back to my work and saying, okay, what am I supposed to remember? But like I said, it has given me some tools, and I do still need to keep working on it. But yeah, I problem solve my own life problems with my artwork all the time. Did you have a question, Jason?
Yeah, we have one from Zoom actually today. She was asking if you still plan to her paint.
Do I still what? Oh, paint. Oh, I haven't painted a landscape in a long time. But I'm getting older and it's getting harder to do this work. So I might go back to it. Or if I'm not painting it, I might find another way to do it on paper. Maybe not with paint, but with something else. Yeah.
We do one last one and then do the wrap up.
So is there a, okay, please.
Good question, Luke. There is a place I haven't done yet that is on the list for next time I get to my studio. It's a drainage divide. And but I wouldn't call it a bucket list place. I'm going to say no, because I think a lot of the time what I'm doing, like I said, has to do with what's going on in my life. So that's how they crop up. But I'll see if I can come up with one.
Okay. Would you do the honor of drawing the raffle for
Oh,
us?
sure.
So this is for the bouquet of flowers that were out front. Must be present to win.
Jessica Withers.
All right.
That turned me off, I guess.
And thank you, June. One more time. Could we have another round of applause for June? Thank you so much. And now we will be joined by Zoom by Magda Julkowska. And Magda joined BTI as an assistant professor in 2020 as part of the cluster hire. That is showing good, Magda. Yes. We can't see you though. Magda's main research focus is how environmental stress affects plant development and architecture. Born in Poland, Magda's family moved to the Netherlands when she was 13. She completed her schooling at the University of Amsterdam, where she obtained a PhD in plant physiology, studying salt stress induced changes in root architecture of the model plant Arabidopsis in Krista Testrink's lab. All right.
Yes, awesome. And then I need to figure out, am I sharing? I'm probably not sharing. Share screen.
Like that?
Um,
Then Magda traveled to Saudi Arabia, where she was a postdoctoral fellow in Mark Tester's lab at King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, or KAUST for short. And during her time at KAUST, Magda helped set up a high throughput phenotyping facility to help researchers collect larger amounts of data with less effort. And she's currently building a similar high throughput phenotyping facility here at BTI, which we're very excited about. And Magda's interest in how plant architecture and patterns makes her a perfect complement to June. And her talk is entitled Self-Emerging Patterns Underlying the Beauty in Plant Geometry.
Thank you so much, AJ. Awesome. Well, it's always a tall order to follow an artist with their poetic descriptives of everyday reality, making us really realize the beauty and be in awe of the life that is surrounding us. So I'm really feeling very honored to be following such a great speaker as June. And just before I start, I want to make a disclaimer that all of the science that I'm going to be presenting is very much based in the Western science, and we're just starting to appreciate the science that is not canonical and taught at the universities. So I very much would like to apologize for that. So the patterns in nature. So we are very much mesmerized, as June mentioned, by the repetitiveness and the patterns that we see in the life that is surrounding us. And I was always curious, like, how can that be? How are we so entranced by that? And the first ideas about that, or at least the first ideas that we know of, were presented by ancient Greeks, and by no one else than by Plato himself. So Plato had some ideas about the plants, and his ideas were all about the perfect shape. So everything is aspiring to a perfect shape, and this particular flower could be aspiring to a perfect sphere. However, the flowers have much more possible shapes, and not everyone is aspiring to a perfect sphere. So then symmetry came to mind, and that's something that our flower seems to be found across different species. And our brain is particularly fond of symmetry. So we find faces that are symmetrical much more attractive than asymmetrical faces. And also the buildings that intend to bring us closer to some kind of higher reality or heavens, like mortuaries, churches, and mosques, are often designed as symmetrical to kind of reflect that perfect symmetrical patterns. And also, it's not only humans that appreciate symmetry. Insects might obviously care about the symmetrical shape of the flowers, as that's the main audience that flowers care about. So how so the flowers also have different types of symmetry. So we've got flowers like dahlia and tulip that are actinomorphic, that express radial symmetry. Other flowers, including snapdragon or orchids, are zygomorphic, which is a bilateral symmetry. So why is there some kind of form of symmetry within the flowers? How does that arise? And it's possibly due to location of the female and male organs. So how is the organization of the flower, different components of the flower arising? So majority of the flowers are composed of leaf-like structures called sepals and petals on the outside. Inside of the colorful leaves, we've got both male organs called stamens and female organs called carpels. And the flower development is described by a scientific ABC model. And in here, what we've got is that flowering plants produce a pattern of gene expression, depending on the localization of which genes are expressed, the different organs are arising. So each with distinct functions. So we've got so-called A gene, which itself is involved in formation of those green leaves called sepals. When the cells that show expression of A and B genes start to develop, they develop into those colorful petals. Combinations of a B and C gene, on the other hand, is resulting in the development of male organs, the stamens. And if we've got the expression of the CG alone, then we've got the female organ development, the carpel. So that's all nice, but it explains radial symmetry, but it doesn't really explain this bilateral symmetry. So how are the snapdragon flowers developing? So over there, what we've got is we've got a set of not only A, B, and C genes, but we've got also another set of genes that are expressed in the adaxial and abaxial sides. And those are a set of transcription factors that are produced in the top and the bottom part of the flowers. And those genes have inhibitory effects on one another, ensuring that there is a clear border separating the upper part and the lower part of the flower. And we're still expanding our knowledge of how exactly are the molecular mechanisms underlying the flower development. And we're trying to understand how those mechanisms might be evolutionary conserved, and how are they different across different plant species, and how are they being shaped by the evolution. But our more functional understanding of how flowers functions is quite old, and it extends all the way to Victorian England. But when in Victorian England people learned that the flower is a home to one female that shares its home with multiple husbands, people were not entertained by this idea, and the flowers were generally condemned as very immoral creatures. And that became that's translated into a Victorian craze in ferns. So ferns are quite interesting from the pattern formation side of view, since they've got their leaves are oftentimes showing secondary and tertiary branching patterns. And it's interesting to think about how those patterns are emerging. So in order to see how all of those multiple organizational patterns are emerging, we need to go back to a German poet called Johann von Goethe. And he was an 18th century poet, and he was a little bit of a polymath. He did not only dabble in poetry, but also a little bit in natural science, and was interested in many, many different things. And he suggested that the different bits of plant are structurally modified leaves, which are functionally specialized for either reproduction or protection. And he published this theory in 1790 in the essay called Metamorphosis of Plants. Goethe was also fascinated by this idea of an Urpflanze, which is this picture that we've got on the right of the slide, where he said that that's a plant that all of the plants are originating from, and this plant is able to produce all kinds of organs. This work is sounding outrageous at this very moment, because we know that those plants are not the forms, the life forms that plants originally evolved from were much simpler than this Urpflanze. But it's actually surprising how this fantastical view of natural world, coming from the brain of Goethe, is quite accurate, because he essentially discovered a serially homologous nature of plant organs, from leaf to petals of a flower. So Goethe said that all plants are leaves. Well, all plants are not leaves, but they're all meristems. So if you think about the development of a human is being born with all of the bits that they need, or most of them. So we've got hands, we've got the lungs, we've got the legs, we've got the brain, we've got eyes, and once we're born, we're ready to go. But when plant is being born, it's actually a seed. It doesn't contain a proper root. It doesn't contain leaves that are able to photosynthesize immediately. So the plant morphology is developing as the plant is growing, and it's able to adjust to an environment that is surrounding a plant. So then, and it's also fascinating that you can recreate an entire plant just from the few cells. If you extract few cells from a carrot, you could basically recreate an entire carrot. And we're using those kind of like meristematic activity and reprogramming activity in our cell culture science, and also in the plant transformation. So you can recreate, and cloning of the plants is also very popular. So the main bits of the plant, so plants are not necessarily leaves, plants are meristems. So meristems are those tissues that are actively dividing, and plant has two of those meristems, and those meristems are already present within the developing seed, or even not developing seeds. You've got already two meristems. One of the meristem is at the very top of the plant, so that's a shoot apical meristem, and one of the meristem is at the very bottom of the plant, root apical meristem. And then in between, you've got all kinds of other secondary meristems, like a cambrium, that are ensuring that the plant can grow thicker and provide more girth to its growth if it grows too tall for its size. So the meristems are leaving, especially in the, so let's have a look at the shoots. So shoot apical meristems are giving rise to the leaves. And if we have a look at the typical plant that we study, Arabidopsis, it's not a magical plant. It's just a very easy model to study. And if we look at how the leaves are organized, how they are coming up. So this is the one of the younger leaves, and the leaves that was developed before, it's this one. Okay, and then the leaf that was developed before this specific leaf is this one. And the leaf before, it's this one. So now you can start seeing a pattern that there is definitely some kind of regularity in which those leaves are emerging. And if we look even closer, if we zoom into the meristem, and we really see those primodia, or like little zits that are then developing into a proper leaf, we can see that those primodia are forming already under a specific angle. And that angle is 137.5 degrees, which is also known as golden angle. So I'm very happy that June already told you a little bit about Fibonacci. And the Fibonacci numbers, because we're going to get there in a few minutes. So golden ratio is as June explained, is the ratio of the smaller part to the bigger part. The ratio is exactly the same as the bigger part to the sum of the two of the previous ones, right? And we see that golden ratio in all kinds of things. Like you can see the golden ratio in the bones of your fingers. And all of the other parts of your body as well. So the golden ratio held a very special fascination for at least 2,400 years, although without that much reliable scientific evidence, like why do we see it coming? So mathematicians, astronomers, and artists spent endless hours over the simple ratio and its properties. And numerical equivalent of the golden ratio is a Fibonacci set. So Fibonacci, as June already told you, published this work called Liber Abaci, where the sequential numbers approach the golden ratio. And he was convinced that this specific series would describe increase in rabbit population over time, which is fair, but it didn't, because not every rabbit population has limits, and this earth can only carry so many rabbits. Nothing against rabbits. But it approached the golden ratio. So this numerical representation can be found in all kinds of shapes, and this is typical representation of the golden ratio. So we've got here 1 and 1 is 2, 1 and 2 is 3, 3 and 2 is 5, and so forth and so on. So you've got this beautiful spiral that is observed across all kinds of phenomena, ranging from within the plants, within the sea organisms, within all kinds of natural and political phenomena. But so how is it possible? Why? So people were really struggling to think why this graphical form can be found all over in the nature. And what is underlying it? Why do we have so many patterns? And is this some kind of like a self-organizing nature of nature? So in 1991, a scientist called Levitov proposed a model for this, specifically for Phyllotaxis. So Phyllotaxis is how the plant branch, producing a new phylum, therefore a branch. And he said, okay, so if this is a self-organizing nature of whatever form, if we put some magnets, if you put them too close, they are repelling each other, right? So if we put magnets on the side of the ball bearing, right? And then if we stack all of the magnets on a big column, at the beginning, maybe the pattern is going to be a little bit errors, so we're not going to get the golden angle, but at some point, we should get, because the magnets are going to be repelling each other, we should get some kind of a self-organizing nature of nature. So what he did is he stacked all of those magnets on a big column, and the ratio between the points of those magnets was indeed 137.5 degrees, which was quite stunning. And that's how the magnetic calculus was constructed. So with this setup, the researchers have verified that Levitov's model. So developing primodia, so those little points that are going to be forming later on a leaf, they must release some kind of repelling agent, telling all of the other cells that are around that, saying, don't develop new leaf in here, I'm already there. But how does that happen? So what are the molecular processes that are underlying those patterns that we're seeing? The idea of inhibitor molecules was proposed at the beginning of the 20th century by no one else than Alan Turing. So although Alan Turing is most known for cracking the codes during the Second World War, as well as making a test to recognize whether you're human or you're a machine, he also had his thoughts on pattern formation. So he proposed this very simple model of reaction diffusion model consisting of two molecules, one being an activator, so that's this red molecule A, and one being an inhibitor, the blue one with the I. So while the system is stable in steady state, the fun starts when the molecules starting to diffuse, right? So we've got activator molecule that is activating itself, since like, yeah, let's go activator. So it's propagating itself, but then that's also propagating the signal for the inhibitor to get higher. And at some point when the inhibitor is getting at its highest, it starts to have like a properly negative effect on the activator and starts to inhibit itself. So then the activator concentrations are getting less as it's diffusing. then we've got the inhibitor that is inhibiting itself, and that allows activator to go off again. So that sounds, quite a simple model. So how can we get from there to all of the beautiful patterns that are surrounding us? So the patterns can predict seemingly complex patterns, like the one that we find in the boxfish. So if the pattern formation occurs relatively early in development, you've got big blobs, like the ones that we see on the cows. But if the pattern occurs relatively late, we can see very intricate patterns. So the later the pattern formation is occurring within an animal or within a plant, the more complex pattern can become. So this model can be extended to multiple activator and inhibitor components, and depending on the direction of the diffusion and the diffusion rate, the differences in diffusion speed between the activator and inhibitor, we can predict multiple forms, multiple patterns that are depicted in here on this picture on the right. The activator and inhibitor molecules were back in the days called morphogenes, which are now being discovered in developmental biology of animal and plants field alike. One of the most known morphogens that we know is called Auxin. So Auxin is also known as idle 3-acetic acid, and it's the name of the Auxin is coming from branching. The formula for formation or the production of Auxin is preceding the formation of the new primordia. So whenever you're about to have a new primordia, you're going to have an Auxin maxima, and that's inhibiting everything else as well. So as we could predict really from the models that were proposed by Alan Turing, depending on the meristem size, your pattern branching is going to be very, very different. And so in here, we see a couple of mutants. So here is a mutant in Arabidopsis, a clavata, and here is a mutant in maize that are not necessarily any mutants in branching, but they have mutations that affect their meristem size. And just the size of the meristem and how equal, nice, round it is, it's going to hugely impact how well are you branching. So this Phyllotaxis, or the pattern of branching, has inspired quite a lot of people in our human world. So here is a construction by Saleh Masumi, which has proposed the design. So Saleh Masumi has built and exhibited several bamboo towers based on Fibonacci sequence, while Aiko Hizume, proposed the design of an apartment building where you've got some kind of balconies project outside of the building in a spiral arrangement that basically mimics the Phyllotaxis in the spiral Phyllotaxis. And that's causing that the balconies are shading each other as little as possible, so everyone can enjoy a nice sunny day like we have today. Whether this principle of using the light as efficiently as possible is causal to plants having a spiral Phyllotaxis, it remains to be unsolved, because there are quite a lot of different phyllotaxic models for the plants. So we've got plants like Arabidopsis that have a spiral Phyllotaxis, but we've got also plants that are producing leaves in a very, very different patterns. The opposing side of the plant, or the whole whorls like we see in here. So it's very tempting to make a lot of guesses at what the nature intended, but it really probably depends on the situation and what is the environment that you're really in. So just to kind of give a little bit of a plug of what my lab is studying, we're studying patterns, but they're not as well. Beauty is in the eye of beholder. So the patterns that we're studying in my lab are maybe not as perfect. They're a little bit more messy than the ones that I talked earlier today. So the patterns that we're studying are the patterns in the root system architecture. So here we're looking at the tomato roots in the wild relative of tomato that is super tolerant to salt stress, drought stress, and heat. And we're observing different topologies of the root system architecture that we give some easy to remember names. And we're at the moment we're evaluating what are the genetic components underlying those topologies and which topology of the root system architecture would result in the best performance of the plant under specific environmental stresses. The other plants with very interesting topologies or architectures that we're studying are peppery bean, which is native to northwest of the US and northern Mexico, which are typically a very arid regions. And as you can see, it has a very beautiful architecture. You've got different branches that are spinning off from the armpits of the leaves. We're also studying cowpea, which is another species that is extremely tolerant to drought and heat stress that is native to West Africa. And there is a tremendous diversity in the growth shapes and forms that we observe. And another plant that we keep on studying is Arabidopsis. And for this one, we're looking at the patterns that are maybe a little bit less flashy, but still interesting to explore. And those patterns involve the biomass distribution between the shoot and the root. And in order to study all of those patterns, we need to have so-called phenotyping tools. So here is a small machine that we 3D printed, where on the plates you can see Arabidopsis seedling growing, and we can image them using this little robot every 20 minutes, which saves us a lot of time because we don't need to be imaging all of those plates every single 20 minutes. And it also allows us to reveal the diurnal rhythms in the growth rates of different plants across different conditions that we're interested to study. And then the other thing that we're also using for phenotyping is we needed to come up with some creative designs to phenotype plants with a little bit more complicated architecture. So if you think about a cowpea or tomato, you cannot really image it from one plane. And even if you image it from one angle, it's very limited view. So we put a plant on the rotating platform to capture as much biomass and capture the biomass of the plant as precisely as possible. And if we do it using pictures rather than chopping the plant off, we can actually study how the plant is doing throughout exposure to drought stress. And we can see that there's differences in the growth rate of the plants. And with that, I hope that I have convinced you that there is much to learn from geometry and the patterns in the plants. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Appreciate you
I'm going to share my screen, otherwise I'm going to
being
be
safe for us. And now for questions. Get one in the back.
Thanks so much for your talk. I don't know if you heard the first presentation, but we had an artist that expressed, and I understand it, her experience in the landscape and how it helped her find new paths in her life. No violence.
I couldn't hear the question. Could someone repeat it, please?
He's asking, I'm going to try to sum that up. Related to June's presentation, is there a way to think about genome expression in an artistic sense as art, genome expression as art?
Yes, so there are actually people who start to look at gene expression and using topological methods. So kind of look at whether a shape of the whole genome expression is changing under specific conditions and under specific tissues. And those methods, because they are visual, they rely on your visual cognition, are allowing us, simple scientists with simple brains, to make much more sense using those visual methods, because you can see whether the arm is stretching of a specific cluster of the genes and how far is that stretching, or whether that arm is completely disappearing or going in a totally different direction. So they're absolutely, we're starting to develop those methods to look at the topology and distance between the different points rather than just numbers. Is that answering your question?
You use the term as nature intended. And I think this is somewhat related to the previous questioner. And so that implies intentionality of some sort. What is your understanding of as nature intended, or were you just using it as a kind of a manner of speech?
I am so sorry for using that. I did not, I think this, I didn't realize that I was using it. I don't think that this should be something that, it's not a very favorite phrase of mine. I don't think that nature intends anything. It's more like kind of, I don't think that there is a final aim for everything, but I just believe that there are consequences rather than intentions. So yeah.
Any from Zoom? Okay, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you, Magda. Thank you, June. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. And thank you to Cayuga Landscape for sponsoring this great event. And please join us next month for our virtual Breaking Ground event with Joyce Van Eck. And that'll be on August 16th at 12 noon. And you can register and get the Zoom link for it on our website, btiscience.org. And thanks again for coming. These kinds of events couldn't happen without support from community members like you all. And if you'd like to give a donation, we have posters with QR codes out in the atrium, or you can donate on our website. We have devices to take those. And for those of you who signed up for the greenhouse tour, Brian is back there. He will lead you around. And please stop and get some of the delicious papaya. There's some amazing fresh fruit out in the atrium, thanks to Alliance for Science. And that's all. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.